Elena was 24 years old the morning she packed one bag and walked out of a palace that was never truly her home. She did not rush. She did not make noise. She moved through the wide, silent hallways with the careful steps of someone who had been planning this for a long time, but had only just decided to stop waiting for a better moment. The marble floors were cold under her feet. The guards at the outer gate were still half asleep. The sun had barely risen, and Elena walked through the gate, turned left onto the road, and did not look back. Not once. 2 years before that morning, Elena had come to the Silverstone estate as the chosen partner of Darian Ashvale, the Alpha King. On paper, it was the kind of life that seemed to have no problems. She had a room that was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. She had staff who brought her meals and pressed her clothes. She had a seat at formal dinners, and a name that made other people stand straighter when she entered a room. But Darian was not unkind in the way that people usually mean when they use that word. He did not raise his voice. He did not say cruel things. He simply treated Elena the way someone treats a piece of furniture they chose carefully but no longer notice. Present, useful when needed, forgotten the rest of the time. He had a pack to lead. He had councils and boarders and decisions that filled every hour of his day. Elena understood that. She had tried, in the first months, to find a place inside that world. She had sat in on meetings when she was allowed. She had learned the names of every elder and every head of household. She had asked good questions and offered quiet opinions, and done everything a thoughtful partner was supposed to do. Darian would nod. Then he would return to his maps. The loneliness was not dramatic. That was what made it so heavy. It sat on her chest, like something that had been there so long it started to feel like part of her own weight. She found out she was expecting a child on a Thursday in November. She sat with the news for 3 days before she told Darian. She chose a quiet evening when the council had finished early, and he was in his study with a cup of tea, and no particular urgency in his shoulders. She thought that was the best version of him she was likely to find. She stood in the doorway and told him. He looked up from his papers. He studied her face for a moment. Then he said that he would arrange for the court physician to begin regular checks. He said it the way someone says they will arrange for a car to be serviced. Practical, efficient, finished. He looked back down at his papers. Elena stood there for another few seconds. Then she walked back to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and felt something shift inside her. Not break exactly, but settle into a new position, like a bone that had been slightly out of place, finally deciding which way it was going to fall. She started packing that night. Small things at first, hidden inside a winter coat. Then, over the following 2 months, a quiet and careful collection. Money set aside from her personal allowance, a phone with a new number, the address of someone who owed her a favor, and lived far enough away to matter. On a Tuesday in early spring, she left. The city of Ashford was nothing like Silverstone territory. It was mid-size and ordinary, full of coffee shops and bus routes, and people who did not know or care who she was. Elena rented a small apartment on the upper floor of a building that had a bookshop on the ground level. The owner of the bookshop was a woman in her 60s, who asked no questions, and occasionally left a bag of bread outside Elena's door when the weather was bad. Elena found work at a health clinic, using a different last name. She was good at her job. She kept her head down. She bought a second-hand sofa and a lamp she genuinely liked, and a small potted plant that she was determined to keep alive, which felt, at the time, like a personal project of some importance. Her son, Luca, was born in early spring. She held him in the hospital room, no ceremony, no court, no one watching, and cried in a way she had not let herself cry in years. Not from sadness, from the particular relief of something beginning. Marcus Hale lived across the hall. She noticed him first because he was quiet. In a building full of thin walls and audible neighbors, his apartment produced almost no sound. She later learned that he worked long hours running a small construction company and coached youth soccer on weekends, and came home tired in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. He knocked on her door once, about 3 weeks after she moved in, to let her know that the building's water would be off for 2 hours the next morning. He had a thermos of coffee in his hand, which he held out and said was extra. She took it. He nodded and went back across the hall. That was the beginning of a friendship that moved the way real friendships move, slowly, without announcement, through small and repeated acts of ordinary kindness. He fixed a shelf that had pulled away from the wall. She gave him half of a pot of soup she had made too much of. He watched Luca for 40 minutes one afternoon, when she had a work call that ran long. She left a note under his door thanking him. He slipped a note back that said it was not a problem, and that Luca had very strong opinions about which shapes of pasta were the best ones. She laughed for the first time in a long time, reading that note. Luca was 2.5 years old the evening he called Marcus Dada. It happened without warning, the way the most important things usually do. Marcus was sitting on the floor of Elena's apartment, helping Luca build something ambitious out of wooden blocks, and Luca looked up at him with the complete seriousness of a toddler who has just decided something, and said, "Dada, dis one go here?" Elena, standing in the kitchen doorway, went completely still. Marcus went still too, but only for a second. Then he looked at Luca with great care and said, "You can call me whatever feels right to you, buddy." His voice was steady. He was not performing steadiness, he simply had it. Then he looked at Elena. It was a brief look, and it asked nothing from her. It just let her know that he had heard what happened, and that however she needed to respond to it was completely fine with him. She went to the bathroom and cried into a hand towel for 10 minutes. Then she washed her face, came back out, and sat down on the floor next to both of them, and helped build the structure, which collapsed 3 times before it stood. Luca cheered every time it fell. He thought that was the fun part. Over the year that followed, Marcus became a constant in their lives, in the way that reliable things become constants, not through grand gestures, but through presence. He was there, consistently, quietly, dependably there. He never pushed for more than Elena was ready to offer. He never made her feel that his patience had a limit or a price. He told her once, when they were washing dishes together after a late dinner, that he believed the best things were built slowly. He said it casually, the way people say things that are true enough to them that they do not realize they are saying something important. Elena thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. Luca called him Dad, with complete confidence by the time he was 3. Not as a question, not as a test, just as a fact, the way children state facts, with the certainty of someone who has not yet learned to doubt what they feel. 4 years after Elena left the Silverstone estate, 2 men she recognized appeared at the edge of the clinic car park. She saw them before they saw her, which was the only reason she had time to step back inside and call Marcus from the supply room. He arrived in 11 minutes. Luca was already safe with a trusted neighbor. Behind the 2 men, parked at the curb, was a black car, and in the car, when it finally opened, was Darian Ashvale. He had not aged the way she expected. He looked the same in structure, same height, same posture, but there was something in his face that had not been there before, a kind of tired weight that had nothing to do with sleep. He crossed the car park and stopped a respectful distance from her, and she noticed, with some surprise, that he was not carrying himself like a king arriving to collect something. He was carrying himself like a man who knew he had made a mistake and had driven a very long way to say so in person. He spoke carefully. He talked about responsibility. He talked about his son's right to know where he came from. He talked about pack tradition and lineage, and the obligations that came with being born into leadership. Elena listened to all of it. She let him finish. Then she said, simply and without anger, that Luca did know where he came from. She told him that a child's life was not a tradition or an obligation. It was a daily thing, built from meals and bedtimes, and someone showing up when they said they would. She told him that Marcus had been showing up every day for 3 years, and that Luca called him Dad because Luca was 4 years old and knew exactly who was there. Darian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, almost to himself, he called another man father first. Elena nodded. Yes, she said, because that man was there first. Marcus arrived as she finished speaking. He walked across the car park without hurry and stood beside her. He looked at Darian. Darian looked at him. There was a long silence between the 2 men, the kind of silence that is actually a conversation conducted without words, where each person is reading the other and deciding what kind of exchange this is going to be. Marcus spoke first. He said he was not Darian's opponent. He said that Luca deserved, when he was old enough, to understand his full story. He said that today, the only things that mattered were Elena's peace and Luca's safety, and that anything beyond that would need to be a conversation Elena chose to have on her own terms. He said it without raising his voice. Without posturing, without performing strength, he had no need to perform. Darian looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Elena. Something moved across his face. Recognition, perhaps, of the specific thing he had failed to be. He nodded once. He got back in his car and left. 2 months later, Elena wrote to Darian through a third party. She offered him the following. When Luca was old enough to understand, she would tell him the full truth. She would not speak of Darian with bitterness. She would not take something away from her son that was rightfully his to know. In exchange, she asked for no legal interference and no attempts to remove Luca from the life he had built. Darian accepted every condition. He signed the agreement without changing a single word. Elena and Marcus were married the following spring, in the bookshop downstairs. The owner of the shop closed it for the afternoon and put flowers in the window. There were 14 guests, all of whom fit comfortably around tables that had been moved together for the occasion. Luca wore a clip-on tie and took his role as ring-bearer with deep seriousness. He had practiced the walk 17 times. He delivered the ring at exactly the right moment, then looked up at Marcus with great satisfaction, as if he had just completed a task of some national importance. Marcus picked him up and held him during the last part of the ceremony. Luca rested his head on Marcus's shoulder and fell half asleep, the way children do when they feel safe enough to stop paying attention. On Luca's 7th birthday, after the cake had been eaten and the guests had gone home, Elena sat with him at the kitchen table and told him everything. She used simple words. She told him that he had been born into a very old and powerful world, and that she had made the choice to leave it because she wanted something different for both of them. She told him about Darian, who he was, what he led, why his blood connected Luca to something large and ancient. She told him that Darian was working on becoming someone worth knowing. And she told him that none of this changed a single thing about the life they had. Luca listened with the focused expression he always wore when something seemed important. When she finished, he was quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he asked if there was any cake left. She laughed and said yes. Marcus cut him a piece. That night, after Luca was in bed, Elena stood at the kitchen window. Marcus came and stood behind her, his arms around her, and they were both quiet for a while. Outside, the street was ordinary. A bus going past, a neighbor walking a dog, the distant sound of someone's music through an open window. She had left a palace. She had built an apartment. She had traded grandeur for a bookshop downstairs, and a man who fixed shelves and left notes about pasta shapes and held her son during wedding ceremonies. She had not looked back. And standing at that kitchen window, with the ordinary street below her and her ordinary, complete life around her, she understood that not looking back had never been about forgetting. It had been about knowing, with absolute certainty, that everything she needed was already in front of her. It still was.